Please make your way into the auditorium. The program is about to begin. Good morning, everyone. You got signal now? Okay. I'm just going to yell at these folks out in the lobby. Kill them this way. Okay.
Good morning. If everyone could please take your seats, we're going to get started. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Mignon Diaz. I'm a commercial agent with NAI Ladder and Bloom, and as this year's event chairman, it is my pleasure to welcome you to NOMAR CID's 13th Annual Economic and Real Estate Forecast Symposium. For some of you here, it is your first time joining us, so I'd like to offer a warm welcome to you today. And for the majority of you here, it may be your second or seventh time joining us. So to that I'd say, welcome back. We're glad to see you. As for me, this is my fourth forecast and first as chairman. And I would not have been able to achieve this level of success without the help of my two co-chairmen, David Keller and Lance Ginn, the forecast committee, including our past chairman, and the entire staff and board at NOMAR, especially Carrie Robinson, Nora El-Arabi, and Stephanie Valerie for their unwavering support. We began planning this year's event not long after I returned from my honeymoon in February, and I will say there are a few parallels between planning a wedding and planning a day like today. I'm excited to announce that the Forecast Committee secured 38 sponsors from across all real estate disciplines, including but not limited to brokerages, banks, appraisers, mortgage lenders, roofers, etc. The sheer number of sponsors, along with over 500 people in attendance, clearly demonstrate the interest in relevant information presented given the unpredictability of today's real estate market. The committee would like to personally thank our returning presenting sponsor, Gulf Coast Bank and Trust Company, for their commitment again this year. Please be sure to visit all of the sponsor tables during the breaks and lunch, and for a full list of sponsors, please reference today's program. I would also like to take this time to thank our media partners, NOLA.com and Gamble Communications, and the team at Jefferson Performing Arts Center for being a great host for the second year in a row. We have an exciting and informative program today with a powerful group of expert speakers. Each speaker and panel will be addressing this year's theme, adapting to unpredictability, and what it means in his or her respective business. We are facing unprecedented times in the market today and adding new headwinds by the week. For me, saltwater intrusion was not in my recent vocabulary because the last time this was an issue for our city that we had to pay attention to was before I was born. It is my hope that you leave today with a few nuggets of information to take home to your families and integrate with your clients, all while reconnecting with old colleagues and forging connections with someone new in our industry. Now, for a few housekeeping notes. As mandated by the Louisiana Real Estate Commission and the Louisiana Real Estate Appraisers Board, in order to receive 6 hours of continuing education credit for today's program, you must be present the whole day. Your CE card can be found inside your program, and it will need to be filled out and turned in to a NOMAR staff member at the end of the day. Your CE certificate will be emailed to you once processed at NOMAR. We will have one 30-minute break this morning from 10:30 to 11, a 1-hour box lunch break from 12:30 to 1:30, and another 30-minute afternoon break from 3 to 3:30. Immediately following our program is a cocktail hour from 5 to 6 in the lobby. In the interest of time, we will not be taking questions from the audience, but feel free to find our speakers during the breaks. Please be respectful of our speakers and one another by silencing your cell phones and returning to the auditorium on time for each session. Keep in mind that there is no food or drink allowed inside the auditorium, and bathrooms can be found on the far side of the lobby under our hanging banners on the mezzanine and terrace levels. Before I introduce our first speaker, I'd like to recognize a few elected officials and important personnel joining us today. Alice Clark, Executive Director of NOMAR, Norman Morris, Executive Director of LR, Liz Tardo, President NOMAR, Mike Mito, President CID, Representative Stephanie Hilferty, Louisiana House of Representatives and friend of real estate, Senator Kirk Talbot, Louisiana State Senate, Beth Christina, Director LR, and Jerry Bologna, Executive Director of JEDCO. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome Danushka Nanayakkara, an Assistant Vice President for Forecasting and Analysis at the National Association of Home Builders, to kick off Session 1, A Perspective on the Economy. For Danushka's and all of our speakers' biographies, please reference today's program booklet. We will first have a word from our title sponsor, Gulf Coast Bank and Trust Company, before Danushka takes the stage. Thank you.
Good morning, folks. Great to see y'all. This is an interesting time in real estate. I hope you can stay and listen to my talk this afternoon when we wrap it up after a long day. On behalf of Gulf Coast Bank, really appreciate the effort you guys have put in. We know how tough it's been this year. We know the effort you've put in and the challenges of dealing not only with high interest rates, but also with the high insurance rates. So our hats are off to you. We appreciate your effort, and we really appreciate the effort that you make for your clients to help them get into the house they want, to solve their real estate problems, despite the difficult conditions that we're facing today. So thank you very much for being here, and look forward to hearing the economic forecast.
Good morning. Is that how it's going to be today? Yeah, everybody's going to fall asleep during econ, giving you nightmares on Econ 101. I'm just kidding. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the invitation to speak to you today. I'm going to talk about the housing market. So we're going to break into a few sections in my presentation, talk about the macroeconomy, because housing makes up around over 15% of GDP. So we have to address the macroeconomy, then talk about housing demand side from the consumer, talk about the supply side on the builder perspective, the challenges to building more residential units. And then I'm going to bring everything together with the NHB forecast for single family and multifamily. All right, so let's get started. So the economy has actually done remarkably well. Last year, we were pretty sure we were going to see a recession right about now. And we even had a recession built into our forecast. And things were surprisingly really resilient. The first half of this year, we saw over 2% GDP growth, and the third quarter is tracking to be over 4% growth for this year. It is really remarkable. It's coming from consumer spending. So we have taken the recession off the books for now, but we are expecting, the next 2 years to be just over 1% growth, right? So a little bit below trend, but still no recession in the forecast. But that does not mean there are some sectors of the economy did not see downturn. So housing, for one, which is very interest rate sensitive industry, saw a massive declines last year. And even this year, with the interest rates now ticking back up again, we are expecting, the housing market to be very, very choppy. So manufacturing is now another industry that actually saw really declines last year too. So there are some industries, but overall, the economy has done much more better than we actually expected. So it's good news, right? Another good news is the labor market. So as of last July, we've recovered all the 22 million jobs that we lost during the 2020 in March and April. We've recovered all of the jobs back. But that does not mean that, we are now at full recovery, because we still need to be creating more jobs, because we have the demographics. We are still a lot of people unemployed. Unemployment rate is at 3.8% at this point, or over 5 million unemployed people. But the job openings rate, right, that comes from the BLS, it's at 9.6 million for the economy. So roughly around 2 jobs per unemployed people. I'm sure you see all the help wanted sign everywhere you go, right? We just need the people working in the gig economy to come back to the labor force. At the same time, the labor force participation rate, which is the portion of the people either actually working or looking for a job, has not recovered. So before the pandemic hit, we were at 63.3. Right now, it's at 62.8. So we still have ways to go. So I don't have the slide here to show the genders, but the labor force participation rate among men has not recovered. But the women are actually now has come back, because women took brunt of the pandemic, right? They left the labor force to take care of the children, the elderly parents. Now the women are actually coming back, but the young men are still lagging behind. So we have ways to go in the actual recovery of the labor market so far since the pandemic. Inflation. Is anybody thinking about inflation? My mother talks about it all the time, and she doesn't even know what I do for a living half the time. So it's really funny. She says, the food prices are so high. Yeah, I know. Everybody feels it, right? Food prices are up over 4%. But the overall CPI, right, the Consumer Price Index, have actually come down from last year, June. Over 9% last June. Right now, it's at 3.7% year over year. In here, I have the shelter measure here, because the shelter component of the CPI makes up 40% of this index. It's accounting to over 90% of the inflation measure here. So the shelter measure is up 7.3% year over year. The shelter measure is what you pay as rent, right? The BLS asks, what are you paying for rent? And if you own a home, what would be the owner's equivalent of rent? Those numbers don't really change much, right? Because you sign leases for about a year. So unless we have the supply and the affordable housing units in the market, we cannot see meaningful declines in the CPI measure here. And the Federal Reserve don't really pay attention to the CPI measure when they think about inflation. They look at the personal consumption expenditure measure, which comes from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. And that's the measure they keep saying we want to see at 2%. So that means the CPI here, the 3.7%, they want to see it at 2.5%. So we need to figure, they are going to keep having a restraint, the quantitative cycle, the monetary policy really tight until they see this number coming down. But you see the month over month, it has increased a little bit because of the gas prices have gone up, but overall, it is trending lower. So Federal Reserve has 2 mandates set by Congress: to maximize employment and tame inflation. So the labor market, they're feeling, okay, there are 9.6 million open jobs. We've recovered the pandemic job losses. The labor market can take some of the monetary policy tightening. So now we will have to tame monetary policy, like inflation. Can the Federal Reserve build more houses? No, right? So what they're doing instead is increasing the federal funds rate. The federal funds rate is really important because it sets the standards for consumer lending. It does not set the standard for mortgage rates, but this is where the credit cards, interest rates, the student loans, the auto loans, if you have noticed anybody getting a new car or a used car, you're now paying much higher rates than previously. So this is where they want to cool the demand for lending by increasing the federal funds rate. So right now it's at 5.5%. They have increased the rate 525 basis points since 2022 March. And we are expecting another, we built in one more rate hike in the forecast in the November meeting. And we're expecting it to be at 5.75% for a while. So from the messaging of the last meeting, they made it clear that they will only cut half a percentage point for next year and then keep the rate at 5.25 for 2024. So very tight monetary policy, very restrained too. At the same time, they are doing quantitative easing as well. So, still very restrictive monetary policy coming from the Federal Reserve. So what does that mean for our, what we care about, right? The mortgage rates. So the mortgage rates kind of gets hedged against the 10-year Treasury. And the 10-year Treasury has been very volatile and has been very high. So I think it might even approach 5% at the way we are going. So mortgage rates, about 20-year highs at this point, right? Really high. So if you were used, I know a lot of people either refinanced or bought the houses in 3%, right? I think that rate is gone. Probably the new normal could be around 6%, but we have ways to go for that. So I think the mantra is higher for longer. So we would see probably close to 7% interest rates in the next 6 to 12 months. And I know I hear this all the time. If you bought a house in the 80s, you paid 15%, right? 18%, right? I hear this all the time. But I'm also like, you paid $5 for your house, So right now, it's over $400,000, right? So, it's like the younger households, right? It's a huge burden right now. You're paying over 30% of your take-home income for housing costs. That means your cost burdened by your house prices. So it's a very difficult situation for a lot of younger home buyers and younger households. So I, hope you got an idea what the macroeconomy looks like. Let's look at some of the demand side. So home ownership rate, right? It's the American dream. 2004 was the peak at 69%. Right now, we are at 66%, and I don't anticipate that we will see the levels that we saw in early 2000, considering just the fact that the housing costs are much, much more higher right now. This has larger implications because consumer spending makes up 70% of the US economy. And if you own a home, you are going to spend more money, right? So it ties into consumer spending as versus the renter. So if we don't have enough houses, or if people cannot afford to buy a house, those have long-term implications, because also for a lot of people, the home is their primary wealth when they retire. That's how they are going to fund their retirement age. So if we don't have enough housing, or if people cannot attain home ownership, we will see larger implications in the long term. And this is just looking at the home ownership rate by the households. No surprise here, under 35 has the lowest home ownership rate. And just looking at the last year's second quarter versus this year's second quarter, the under 35 demographic actually lost home ownership rate, it actually fell. The 35 to 45-year-old actually increased. So this is the older millennials who are actually increasing the home ownership rate. 45 to 54, roughly the Gen Xers, stable. 55 to 64, maybe the younger baby boomers, very kind of stable as well. And then the 65 and over, the home ownership rate actually fell down a little bit. Maybe they are moving to renting instead. So these are the demographics by the homeowner's age. And this is by the racial groups. So the white population has a home ownership rate of almost 72%. Asians have a home ownership rate of 59%. Native Americans almost at 57%. Hispanic group has almost 47%, and the African American population have the lowest home ownership rate at 42%. And this is looking at the county by county home ownership rates. And this is no surprise here. The larger urban areas have the lowest home ownership rate at 54%. This is the most high cost areas, right? And as we move out of those urban areas, the exurbs have the highest home ownership rate at 75%. And this now makes sense because around 30% of the workers now can do a hybrid work schedule. And if you only have to commute 3 times a week as opposed to 5 times a week, you are now willing to do that hour-plus commute. And we see this by the permit data too. The exurbs and the rural markets are actually doing better compared to the urban areas. All right, so moving on to some of the home prices. Home prices are now over 40% higher compared to just before the pandemic, over 40% higher. So the National Home Price Index, you can see in 2021, 2022, how high it skyrocketed, even more than before the bubble years, right, in 2004, 2005. This is purely driven by the imbalance of supply and demand. We just don't have enough houses. We had enough demand coming from the demographics, and when the pandemic hit, it gives this renewed interest in home ownership that drove up the home prices. We saw some price declines in the last few quarters, but now we can see the trend has been reversing, and the home prices are now again in positive territory again. So we expect the market to stabilize, not have the spikes that we saw, just because it's, it's who can at this point afford almost 8% interest rates, right? So we expect the market to stabilize and the prices to be around 1 to 2% in the next couple of years. Some of the population changes here. In 2022, Idaho, Florida, and Texas led the population gain in percentage terms. Boise, I don't know what's going on with Boise. Boise saw almost 3% population gain. I think when all the big tech companies say, hey, you can work from home now, everybody just moved to Boise, right? Drove up the house prices there, created a chaos in that housing market, basically. Now, we are expecting a reverse because now, guess what? Facebook wants you to come back to the office 3 times a week, right? I think there are some areas that are going to see that, like in Texas, Nashville, Phoenix, some of those markets are going to feel the same crunch because, people have to now go back to the office. Basically, everybody has, even the federal government, I live outside DC, so even the federal government mandated you have to show up to the office now. So, but the numeric gain in population is more interesting here. So Texas, Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona. These 5 states accounted for 99% of the numeric population gain in the US in 2022. Just these 5 states. And this is important for housing. Doesn't matter if it's for sale or for rent, because population drives housing. So these 5 states basically got everybody moving from the Northeast to everywhere. And look what that did to the home prices in those markets. So Florida, you can see that in the top 20 markets for home price growth, Florida accounts for majority of those markets. And the top markets had a home price growth between almost 20% to 25% price increase. So total inventory, and I talk about that we don't have enough housing, right? So this is the total housing inventory that we have. So the blue shaded area is the existing home sales. Right now it's around, 3 months supply. And the red shaded area is the new home sales. So in early 2000, new home sales made up around 10 to 15% of market share. But right now, simply because we don't have enough on the existing side, the new home sales are making around 30% of the market share at this point. And we have enough inventory on the new home sales. New home sales inventory is over 7 months supply right now. So we have an oversupply at that point because 6 months is considered a balanced supply. So we don't have enough existing homes, but we have plenty of the new home sales, new home market. But regardless, you can see the total inventory is at decades low at this point. So the last slide on the demand side I want to show you is the affordability index. This is NHB, our measure here is the NHB Wells Fargo Housing Opportunity Index. So this says it's 41. 41 here means only 41% of new and existing homes, the total homes, are affordable to a typical family making the median income of $96,000. Just 41% of the housing stock is affordable. So you can see again the affordability measure is in crisis, right? In decades low again. And from our measure, we have seen that 49% of the households gets priced out if the home price is over $250,000. The national median home price is around $425,000. And that prices out 73% of the households. And every quarter point hike in the mortgage rate prices out over 1 million households. So you can see, the higher home prices, the higher mortgage rates, and the fact that we don't have enough housing supply is what's causing the affordability conditions to be at decades low right now. Are we all bummed out yet? Yeah, I know. It's the kind of a really depressing situation. So I get, it's like, as a representative of NHB, right, new home construction, it's like, why doesn't the builders just build more houses, right? And now I'm going to bum you out more and tell you what are the issues on the supply side. So I said there are 9.6 million open jobs in construction trade, in the overall economy. So in the construction trades, there are 363,000 open jobs, 363,000 open jobs. This includes residential and non-residential. Do you know anybody who's actively going into construction trades? Young people who's interested in going into trade schools? You really don't hear that, right? Yeah, so we have a labor crisis in the construction trades. Not enough young people are attending trade schools, so we have an aging labor force right now. And the Great Recession was absolutely decimated the labor force in construction trades. So we have a crisis here just because if you don't have enough workers, you're now going to pay higher wages. And we need to figure out ways, how do we attract young people? How do we attract women? Women make up almost half the labor force, but we don't have enough women working in the construction trades. So how do we attract these demographics back into the construction trades so we actually don't have a skilled labor crisis? Lumber prices have come back down to earth. In the last couple of summers, we saw the lumber prices spike to over $1,500 per 1,000 board feet. The pre-pandemic average was around $350 to $500. So during the last couple of summers, the lumber price increase alone added over $30,000 to a new construction. Just the lumber price increase alone. So right now the lumber prices are back to normal ranges, but we have concerns that we don't have enough. If we don't have enough supply, if the demand comes back and we actually pick up construction in the next couple of years, we could see the lumber prices spike again. This is gypsum prices. You can see during 2021, 2022, the spikes. Now it has just come back down to 3% over the past 10 months. Steel prices have declined, which is good news. Aluminum prices are 16% higher compared to January 2020. Copper prices are 32% higher compared to the peak in pre-pandemic levels. And then the lending conditions are the biggest headache right now. So I said, on the consumer side, it's the mortgages. But on the builder side, it is the acquisition, development, and construction loans that they take out. So before the Fed started increasing rates, they were paying around 5 to 6%. Now they are paying over 12% for these loans. And considering that majority of home building is done by smaller builders, they do projects like 5, 6 projects, right, a year. This over 12% interest rates that they are paying, they cannot afford it anymore. So the Fed rate is really hurting the builders. And the regulatory cost. This is at the federal, state, local levels. This is an aggregate. For single-family homes, a quarter of the home price is because of regulatory fees. That comes to around roughly $94,000 per home is because of regulatory fees. This is for residential, single family, and on the multifamily side, it goes up to 41% of the development cost is because of regulatory fees. So we need to figure out how do we bring these costs down, how do we have more land in the system, how do we lower impact fees, cut down permitting times in order to actually encourage development. All right, so we covered the macroeconomy, demand side, supply side. I'm going to bring everything together with the construction outlook that we have. Single family, when we do our forecast, we figure out what are the sentiment that looks like for the next 6 to 12 months. And we use our NHP Wells Fargo Housing Market Index. This shows how the builders are perceiving the outlook right now. And for the first time in the last 5 months, the sentiment is in negative territory. It's at 45, so below 50 means that the conditions are getting worse. And the builders are saying it's the interest rates. The buyers are backing off because they are not being able to afford the over 7% interest rate. And then the AD&C construction loans are higher too. So this is the two issues that the builders are citing, and almost everyone is giving it doesn't matter the region, they're all saying the same thing at this point. So we use this to build our forecast. Just looking back, 2021, we built over 1 million units, the best year since 2006. 2022, last year, the year ended great, over 1 million units, but the first decline since 2011. And 2023, we are expecting further declines, just over 900,000 units of single family constructed. And for next year, still under 950,000. And maybe by 2025, we might be able to do over 1 million units. And I'm sure you're thinking, wow, why are you so pessimistic, right? Look at this permits map here. This is single-family permits, which is very well measured, marginally revised, and this is showing where the single-family construction is looking for the next 6 to 12 months. Except for Hawaii, every state is declined. This is looking at year-to-date data, looking at January to July 2023 versus last year's same time period. So basically the first half of the year. Every state is declined. And to reiterate my point further, these are the 10 largest single-family markets by permits. Houston is down 8%, Dallas is down 19%, Atlanta down 14%, Phoenix down 33%, Charlotte is down 13%, Orlando is down 9%, Austin is down almost 40%, Nashville is down 17%, Tampa is down 22%, and Raleigh is down 10%. Why does this matter? Because this represents over 50% of the single-family market right here. They're all in the South. And every single market is in decline. So that's single-family. So let's move on to multifamily. Multifamily last year had a stellar year. Over 500,000 units constructed, and this was driven by the low vacancy rates and the higher rents. That's what was driving. But 2023, we are expecting a decline, but still close to 500,000 units. Multifamily is doing really great. Next couple of years, we are expecting little over 400,000 units, simply because the commercial lending rates are higher, and the fact that there are over 1 million apartments under construction right now. Over 1 million. So these units should come back into the market in the next couple of years. So this is the reason that we have multifamily construction declining at the national level. And this is looking at the permits. Multifamily permits are more volatile because these are larger projects. These are very expensive projects. So these permitting, I wouldn't really look too much into the growth rates, but again, majority of the states are showing declines. And these are the 10 largest multifamily markets by permits. And except for Phoenix and Atlanta, which is just flat, every other market is in decline as well. And New York is the largest market, and that's down 43%. All right, last slide. I know I'm out of time. This is just to give you a recap, right? Next year, eventually, we will see the Federal Reserve starting to normalize rate. Interest rates will stabilize close to around 6 to 6.5. We believe that the single-family market has the potential to lead the recovery. But if the demand comes back up, we have concerns that the supply-side issues will rise again. Looking through 2025 through 2030, we have the demographics. The millennials are here, right? Even though they're having their avocado toast, not interested in getting married, right? Guess what? They are getting married, they are having children. What do they want? Single-family home, right? So we have the demographics in our favor right now. We have a structural housing deficit around 1.5 million units. That's the NAHB estimate. Freddie Mac estimates it to be around 3.8 million units. So if we can build around 1.1, 1.2 million units, we can meet the demand and reduce the structural deficit at the same time. But looking beyond 2030 and after, the demographics coming after the millennials, the Gen Zs and the Gen Alpha, a much smaller population cohort. So like I said, population drives housing. So if there's a smaller population, that means the demand for housing will be weakened. This includes single-family and multifamily. If you have any questions, please feel free to email. But thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. All right, here we go. Let me adjust this a little bit. Well, give everyone a sec to sit down. Man, I just realized I need to update that picture. I got a little more gray hair than last time Okay, so let's get started. What's happening in commercial real estate? And we're going to discuss. My name is Paul Hendershot. I'm a managing director with CoStar. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me, there we go. Let me just adjust this. Yeah, my name is, does that work? Yeah. My name is Paul Hendershot. I'm a managing director of analytics for CoStar. If you're not familiar with CoStar, there's several of my esteemed colleagues in the audience and also out front. They'd be more than glad to discuss all things CoStar with you, but we're basically a commercial real estate research firm. And it's my pleasure and honor to present to this group. There's a lot of exciting things happening in the real estate market, and particularly in New Orleans. And so what I have on the agenda for today is just touch on a few key indicators, economic indicators, and then we'll dive right into the real estate market, basically look at primarily the office and industrial market, then touch on retail and multifamily as well. Kind of look at where we have been, where we are, and look at the health of the market, and also what we have in store for the remainder of 2023 and 2024 primarily. So, without further ado, let me see if I can get this to work. Okay, the big green button, that makes sense. Okay, so when I was putting together the presentation, I usually like to have a little, subtitle, we'll say. And honestly, you guys really nailed this one, adapting to unpredictability, because that's really what we're dealing with right now. Or I also think of Mike Tyson's quote, everyone has a plan till they get punched in the face. And that's basically what happened of the pandemic. And we're still unraveling and spooling up and potential recessions and federal fund rates and all this stuff going on. And a lot of folks are going to show you a lot of slides today looking at just that CPI, inflation, where the federal funds rate may be headed, and how that's impacting all facets of the economy. But I think the driver, I believe the true driver of the U.S. economy is the consumer. And that's what I'm going to focus on in my session on my part on the economy. And just think of it, the latest CPI figures look promising, basically at 4%. Just to, and you can debate how the stimulus was divvied out. Was it efficient? Did it go to the right people? And that's a whole nother policy debates that will linger for probably decades. But the bottom line is, I would have much rather had short-term inflation hit that 10 to 12, maybe 15%, and have it go down, have the Fed have somewhat control over it through interest rates, than unemployment at 15% and go through essentially a jobless recovery for a decade like we experienced during the great financial crisis. And really the US consumer is the consumer of last resort. The world depends on us buying stuff. We buy a lot of stuff we don't even need. Like, take for example, you drive around the previous presenter talked about, the housing. You drive around the suburbs on you see around 5:30, 6 o'clock, beautiful 3,000 square foot home. There's 2 cars parked outside, every house, right? And you're like, this makes no sense. A car's like at least $50,000. You got $100,000 worth of cars sitting out front, baking in the sun, getting hit by hailstorms. All this can potentially happen. Because we buy so much stuff, we filled our garages full of stuff, keep our cars outside, and then we say, hey, we got to give more room. We're the only country, someone can correct me, that no one has yet, that actually created a unique asset class, self-storage, to load that up with stuff. So we truly are the consumer of last resort. The world depends on us. And that is truly, when you think of the health of the US economy, it's driven by the consumer. And I don't mean to downplay, self-storage. It's an important asset, particularly for folks transitioning. If anyone's involved in that type of real estate, I'm not, downplaying. It's a great asset type. But let's look at one thing that I'm a little concerned with is, quite frankly, what's happening as far as the consumer is, they have to start paying back their student loans. And again, there's lots of debate. Should we pay back student loans? Could the cost of college been in check a little bit more over the last 15 years? I have an 11-month at home right now, and I've determined at the current rate of tuition increases, I'm not paying for this thing. The system is broken, right? Pretty much there's no way around it. But at the end of the day, starting this month, people are paying back their student loans. There's $1.6 trillion in student loan debt out there. 43 million Americans have this student debt. And the cost of borrowing, basically is increased from 2.5% to 4.3%. Again, digging into that consumer spending. And then now we're starting to see a rise of delinquencies. At some point, consumers are going to exhaust themselves. We may already see this happening. Delinquency rates have been rising sharply over the past year, particularly in credit card debt. So, hey, we must be doing something, right? Things are back to normal. We quit saving and we're running up our credit card debt, I suppose. But that credit card debt did grow by over $1 trillion to $1 trillion in credit card debt alone. Again, it may impede that soft landing as spending, we're starting to see some, I'd say a few cracks in the consumer. At the end of the day, the consumer, this is looking at the consumer expectations and really and during the strong momentum going into the fourth quarter quickly dissipated as the consumer of last resort is beginning to waver. Consumer sentiment fell for the second quarter consecutive month. Households are more optimistic than they were a year ago, but we are starting to see that uncertainty kind of rear its head again. And at the end, the bottom line, the average payments of $260 a month for the 43 million folks that have debt, this outstanding student debt, will begin to shift their spending patterns. And so we anticipate a fall of about 1% in personal consumption expenditures. And this is all during a time when the Fed is really trying to thread this needle. I know the previous presenter discussed the health of the economy as well. But this soft landing, as everyone is kind of anticipating now, is in a very precarious state. So let's dive into what's happening in New Orleans. I'm going to have all the bad news out of the way first, and then we'll get into some good stuff. New Orleans is having one of the slowest job recoveries in the United States. This is the bottom line. The market lost 108,000 jobs in March and April of 2020. 3 years later, we're still short 27,000 jobs of that pre-pandemic level, of that employment base, where the national employment pretty much was kind of reached that point in mid-2022. But the unemployment rate is still relatively stable at about 4%. And a lot of that just because they haven't had a lot of folks moving into the area. But, you know, it's been a slow slog in terms of the job growth in the market. And most industries in New Orleans are still below those pre-pandemic levels. Particularly one of the calling cards of the community, leisure and hospitality, is still down about 14,000 jobs. So that almost is just about half of those, a little over near about half of those jobs we need to recover are in that sector. And I don't know how it's going to play out in terms of these. Are the economic conditions going to worsen? Are folks going to do some more belt tightening? What does it look like in terms of the convention, festivals, everything on that part of the equation? But the bottom line is, there are two sectors that are above pre-pandemic levels. That's healthcare and education and health services, along with construction. And population growth has remained weak in the region. Over the last 20 years, we've lost about 5% of our population. And you see these, obviously, there's, the Katrina is highlighted there. And we saw that initial surge back as folks were really, returned to the community. And then it's been kind of flat to losing a few folks the last few years. We are anticipating people to return to New Orleans in 2023, 2024, 25, but it's still being outpaced by the U.S. average in terms of our short-term, our forecast for the next few years. So, moving into the office market in New Orleans, and realistically, no asset type has experienced more structural change in the last year than the office market. If anyone is checking, there was no national return to the office day, and if there was, we pretty much all blew through it. A lot of folks, employers have tried to bait people with strange amenities and coffees and this and that, telling them they need to come to the office or else, more or less. We've seen heavy-handed approaches. But at the end of the day, when you look at like space per office user, occupancy, and the number of employees, it has been steadily declining over the last 15 years. That's reality. Teleworking and technology has been in place for quite a while. And these things have always been on the back burner, but the pandemic took these trends and basically put kerosene on the fire, and now we are where we are. So there is a lot of uncertainty in the office sector. Personally, I see it coming back. It will look different than it was before. I don't see the cube farms existing in the same way. I see more teams coming together in certain days, because the idea of having everyone in the office for 3 days of the week, then everyone leaving the office for Mondays and Fridays is not really a good use of space. Bottom line, I mean, we'll have to move to more hoteling, and there's a lot of great research out there, and what some of the architects are doing is really cool to kind of create more collaborative space, and that's really why why the office should exist, is for that collaboration. So let's take a look at what is going on in the New Orleans market. Well, when I was putting together this data, I was like, wow, we have a 6.6% vacancy rate. Literally one of the lowest in the country. The U.S. average is hovering around 13%. Many markets are looking at over about 20 right now. So a lot of like Charlotte and other fast-growing markets where they did a lot of office construction leading up to the pandemic really are suffering. Now, there is a caveat here. The reason why the vacancy rate has remained stable is due to the fact you look at those blue lines, that essentially is demolitions. We've been, over the last 10 years, we have demolished 1.5 million square feet of office space or taken that inventory offline through reuse. Now, that has in turn kept the market stable, but it really is, again, I think where we are, what the trends New Orleans had in place before of right-sizing and looking where the market's headed, we're really kind of keep the market stable today, and it will help keep the market going stable going forward. Geez, I went through a few of these slides. But there has been, when you look at even in 2020, 2022, we did reach a 6-year high, which is, I guess, a promising sign. A few big medical move-ins, 250,000 square feet, along with the Charles Parish Sheriff. They took an office space of 250,000, or as well, 250,000 square feet. So there were some nice move-ins, and I'm sorry, the Ocean Health System took in 320,000 square feet. So there was some nice move-ins. And looking forward, it really we downgraded our forecasts and going forward about 2 months ago because we just saw the office market was not trending in the way we thought it would. So we are anticipating negative net absorption into 2023, 2024, and eventually things will start to stabilize or normalize, hopefully by 2025. But we will see the vacancy rate increase during that period. And there has been a few significant move-outs as well in the second quarter. Freeport, McMo Rand vacated 130,000 square feet, and also a couple other. We all saw, obviously what's happening with Shell. It's kind of a zero-sum game, but that's not a good sign for that immediate central business district. So the amount of sublease space, this was a national trend. A lot of folks were, basically as they're signing new leases, they're taking a few thousand square feet off the market, or putting a few thousand square feet onto the market, particularly sublease. And if a lot of companies adopted that work from home policy and kind of we saw this spike in sublease space. But again, it's starting to normalize or come down as folks are moving into these spaces, and I don't see it reaching the levels of 400,000 square feet that we saw really in 2020, 2021, again in the near term. So moving on to leasing activity by star rating. This was kind of an interesting, one of the big narratives in the office market is flight to quality. It was before the pandemic, and you see some of these, that big gray bar, those are basically your A+, your A buildings, and I'd say B+ as well. That's kind of how we rate our buildings. Then 3-star, you could say would be B, and then maybe C as well, and then 1 and 2-star would be all the stuff below that. And what's interesting here is going through the data, is there's not really a lot of that quality buildings or quality leases have really slowed down. In 2022 is about less than a third of the total leasing. Looking at the first 3 quarters of year to date, it's about less than 20% of the leasing. So definitely, looking at the leasing, I'm not seeing that flight to quality narrative playing out in the New Orleans market. And I have a reason possibly why we'll get to in a second, but I do want to highlight one key lease. This is one of the largest leases we've tracked, counting from Carr, Riggs, and Ingram. Signed a 15,500 square foot lease. Is a new lease at 2 Lakeway. It's a 19-story building built in 1984. Had some renovation work in '96, and it's in the Metairie submarket. And another one that I want to highlight, another new lease. This is more in the central business district. Is a injury law firms. signed into the Energy Center, 9,000 square foot lease. The building's 91% lease, which is really good. The building was built in 1984 and renovated, had some renovation in 2009 work. So, taking a deeper dive in the office inventory, I was like, why is this kind of taking place as far as, this flight to quality? Why isn't it happening? And quite frankly, it's, we just don't have the inventory in place. When you look at there's 55 million square feet of office space in the region. 2 submarkets capture half of that inventory. The Central Business District, along with Metairie, cover 14 million and 10 million respectively. But looking at if you want to call them some of the peers, even we have New Orleans has about 25% of its inventory is considered Class A or 4 and 5 star. Austin and Denver come in at higher than 40%. Nashville's 36. Memphis is 25. The only 2 markets of this peer group that have less space is Charleston and Savannah. And, I put those 2 because I've always heard this, the 3 sisters. You guys probably heard this kind of stuff. It's like, these 3 cities kind of pair up pretty well. I've always thought, personally, if New Orleans and Charleston had a kid, it'd be Savannah. Does anyone, it kind of just has that vibe? New Orleans is definitely the coolest of the kids, though, no doubt about it. But this is one of the reasons why, as companies are moving into area, looking for space, maybe this lack of Class A space is impeding that growth. And then I took it one step further, looked at the office inventory by age. And the lion's share of the buildings were built between 1970s and 1980s. It's very similar to Dallas and other kind of cities in this area, particularly energy-oriented cities, kind of as a boom period, a high growth. And those 2 decades make up 40% of the total inventory. Another unique anomaly in New Orleans is the amount of the pre-1950s, and that's really where you get some of the really cool architecture. And looking at this, a lot of these buildings are coming up on basically that first life cycle of 40 years or so. And so there's a lot of opportunities for renovations to kind of reboot these buildings going forward. So looking at the renovation activity, since 2000, there's been 10 million square feet renovated, averaging just about 420,000 square feet a year. 2015 was a big year, with 1.7 million square feet renovated, and that was largely the Hancock Whitney Center accounted for quite a bit of that. But really, this is a positive sign. I look at this and I say, you know what, people are investing in this community. People are investing and to retain the unique architecture, what makes this place really special. And I think this is a positive sign in the health of the market. Oh, shoot, what did I do? Okay, so we have the percent of inventory that's been renovated by year of construction. Again, those 80s and 90s make up the lion's share of that. Roughly about 50% of those buildings have been renovated in 1970s, and about 75% have been renovated since 2000. And the lion's share could come as no surprise. The lion's share of this activity is taking place in the Central Business District, along with the Metairie submarket. That's really where the lion's share of the office is, so that should come as no surprise. Roughly 5 million square feet in the New Orleans, in the Central Business District alone. This is a pretty interesting one. I just brought this up. An example of the Pan American Life Center. It's basically, it's connected to the Hotel Intercontinental, as we all know. They had a cafe, conference center, upgraded lobby, and it really, just want to highlight a few things, a few pictures here, because at the end of the day, this is really a nice looking lobby, And really, we all are in this business we like cool buildings, I hope. And I just want to highlight a few things that they've done in terms of this specific building. Another example of really this adaptive reuse is in the warehouse district, the 73,000 square foot. It was three warehouses built in the 1920s. And this is a great space for any tech companies. Right now there's a huge gaming development conference going on. I mean, this would really be a great space for kind of that creative IT type of, the exposed brick, kind of a cool location, lots of kind of artsy amenities. It's definitely a really nice space. But the bottom line is another big trend I'm following in the office market, and this is not unique to New Orleans, is the rise of the suburbs. Really, over the last decade, only 7 quarters did suburban demand exceed the suburban demand. The rest, pretty much the suburbs have been the dominant force in terms of the net absorption. Sales volume, investment activity is really designed, the lion's share of the sales are well-positioned buildings, 10,000 square feet or less. Between 2015 and 2019, there was about 37 properties averaged a year. That really shot up in 2021. But really, we've seen this trend across the nation. Just the uncertainty in the office market, along with the rise in interest rates, has really made underwriting challenging. But deals are still getting done in well-positioned buildings where they're well-tenanted, are making it across the finish line, or there's other buildings that are kind of just being sold on a fireside sale, but that's another story. The CMBS loans. Many investors, typically these account for about 12% of the total building inventory. Many investors anticipate an increase in distressed sales activity over the near term. And there's $570 million of outstanding CMBS loans in the market. Around 8.5% were delinquent as of the end of August, well above the national trend of 5%. But on the bright side, many of these loans are not really due till 2025 or 2026. So hopefully we have a little bit of time to, again, the market will stabilize. So I got a few slides on the industrial market. We'll go over these quickly to keep things moving along here. It's a similar story to the office market in some ways. Really, we have seen some leasing activity slow down, and I don't think it's as much as what's happening in the market. It's really a lack of available space in the market. We've seen the vacancy rate drop to below 2%, drop to just about 2%, making New Orleans one of the tightest industrial markets in the United States. And you see, again, there's that demolition rears its head. And over the last decade, we've demolished about 700,000 square feet. But if you look at 21, 2022, and even into 2023, we're expecting to be flat because there's a lot of speculative space going to move onto the market in 2023, and then that should lease up in 2024. And then again, we'll see the market more or less normalize where it should be. So this is a crazy slide when I was putting this together. Typically, New Orleans is seen as an owner-user market, but for the first time, we truly are seeing some of the largest industrial space under construction. We've hit 1 million square feet currently underway. 90% is currently speculative without a tenant. Projects underway include a 500,000 square foot plus distribution facility, as well as a 260,000 square foot phase one of the Propel Business Park. It's basically a 50-acre park near Interstate 510 and co-located with NASA's McCloud Assembly Facility. So, and we're seeing a lot of some aerospace activity around that building, that space. So I believe it will lease up, but this is definitely developers, industrial developers have found New Orleans. The industrial rent, we are anticipating it to decelerate because, quite frankly, 12% isn't sustainable for very long. It just doesn't work. And so we're seeing this, again, a normalization in the market, which I think in the long run is a good thing. Briefly, we'll discuss, I know there's some folks that are going to touch on the apartment market and what's happening there. The apartment market is, again, it's returning to that normalization, looking at both the vacancies and the absorption along with the net deliveries. The vacancy rate, we're anticipating to go down to about 5% next year, or 7%, and then continue down to about 6%. And again, this is, I think, a reflection of that normalization. We are seeing that kind of those construction net deliveries and right around that 1,000 where it was really the last few years or heading into the pandemic. Again, a stabilization in the market. Looking at the rent, the vacancy rate, really, we do see these spikes in the 4 and 5. There was a lot of construction in 2020. And again, we're seeing this kind of normalization across all the asset types. The retail market, I tell you what, I just got to give a hats off to anyone in the retail industry. Retail truly is the Lazarus of all asset classes. We've heard it had been on its deathbed so many times. The downtowns are all dying, the Walmart's going to kill every small town America, all these things. Every time you hear retail news, it's usually negative. But what retail's done is they've adapted and they've got people moving to go into stores, and really, people, again, they love to go out and shop. And retail basically started right-sizing a decade ago nationally, and you see this with the net deliveries, essentially moving across this chart. And now we're in a very stable retail environment. There will be, I think, the 2023, if there is a slowdown in the economy, we will see some shedding of retail space, but the introduction of new concepts, new ideas, never ceases to amaze me. A couple things I've been tracking is really where these these malls are headed. They're going to be reused for everything from call centers to medical centers. It's kind of a lot of interesting stuff in that sector. And also, again, some of these new concepts that have been introduced. So, thank you again. Hopefully, I stayed on time, kind of, sort of here. We're good? All right. And I'll be around all day. And again, I have some colleagues in the audience, or we'll be standing out by the booth. If anyone has any questions, I'm available, and you can always reach out. I love talking real estate, discussing everything going on in every market. So please reach out, and I look forward to hearing from everyone. Thank you.
Hey everyone, just a quick scheduling note. We're going to begin our break at 10:45 and end it at 11:05. So Dr. Gary Wagner will be our next speaker, and just keep in mind, break will be 10:45 to 11:05. Thank you.
Okay. So does it press the button? All right, good morning. So it's nice to be with you. My name is Gary Wagner. I hold the Acadiana Business Economist Endowed Chair position at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. This is my 4th time presenting to folks, and this year I'm going to talk a little bit about the residential market in particular. I want to thank the folks at NOMAR for providing me with access to the multi-list service data, so you'll see a much deeper dive into local real estate conditions than what there's been in the past. Let's see if I can get the clicker to work here. Okay, and so I want to do a super quick look at the national economy, mainly to talk about inflation and what I think it's going to mean for interest rates. This will have some implications for mortgage rates. Then I want to do a deeper dive into recent trends into the Nomar region housing market. And then I want to finish up with a quick discussion about flood insurance, FEMA risk rating 2.0, and what we might see in the local market. I also do want to point out the presentation is pretty dense, as you're going to see. I wanted to give you a pretty broad overview of a lot of economic indicators for the region. So if you are interested in the slide deck, feel free to email me at any point and I can send the slides to you. If you just Google Gary Wagner, University of Louisiana, my email address will pop up and I'll make the slides available to you. So the first thing I want to talk about is just the outlook for the national economy, because it dictates so much of what happens locally and also within the New Orleans area. This is from the Survey of Professional Forecasters. It's run by the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. I participate in this survey that's done quarterly. This is their outlook, their probability of a national recession over the next 5 quarters. So you can see the numbers are elevated, particularly in the first couple of quarters of 2024. So you hear a lot of discussion about a soft landing in the news. The idea of a soft landing is whether we can get inflation back to the target, which I'll talk about in just a minute, while simultaneously avoiding an economic downturn. Historically, it's been tough to do that. I think in terms of these numbers, my own projections for a national recession are significantly below these probabilities you see here. So I think the risk is elevated, but I think over the last 6 months, the national outlook has improved quite a bit. And so I'm optimistic that we will be able to avoid a downturn. But this is just the outlook for the national economy over the next 5 quarters. The green bars are the outlook from the Survey of Professional Forecasters. Those blue bars are the actual last 2 quarters of GDP growth for the U.S. economy. We average around 2% growth a quarter, inflation adjusted. And you can see the outlook over the next year is somewhere around 1%. So we are looking for slower economic activity over the next year. And I think at this point, it's likely that we will, or at least I'm hopeful that we will avoid a downturn. I think the good news for the New Orleans market is job growth in this region is projected to be higher than the national average and the state average over the next 4 quarters. So you can see the 4 bars all the way over to the left are job growth for the U.S. economy over the next 4 quarters. These are projections from the Louisiana Economic Activity Forecast, which is a quarterly report that I produce. It's also freely available. The Louisiana figures for the next 4 quarters are in the middle of the chart. And you can see the New Orleans metropolitan statistical areas at the end of the chart. So I'm actually looking over the next 4 quarters for job growth in the New Orleans region to be the strongest in the state, coming in at about 3% a quarter. These figures were released in August of this year. Next month in November, at the end of November, I'll be releasing an update. I do think the outlook is probably going to be downgraded a little bit for the New Orleans region, but I'm still expecting job growth to exceed 2% over the next 4 quarters. So I think the job outlook for the region is very good. Part of what's happening in the New Orleans market, especially in the last 6 to 9 months, we've seen tourism rebound, and the state is also lagging behind the national economy in terms of recovering from COVID. So part of the faster growth we're seeing is we're kind of catching up to where the nation is. But let me pivot for a second and talk a little bit about interest rates and kind of the inflation outlook and why I think this is going to be tied in with mortgage rates. So that red line is the current federal funds target interest rate, which is set by the Federal Reserve. So why does this matter? When the Federal Reserve changes interest rates, they change this target interest rate, and that in turn affects every other interest rate in the economy, including mortgage rates. So the number you see there on the chart is 5.6%. This is where the Federal Reserve says they expect this interest rate to be at the end of this year. The dashed red line is where we currently are. So if you take their guidance literally, and this guidance was provided in September, they're saying that they expect to raise interest rates 1 more time this year. I think they're probably unlikely to raise interest rates one more time this year, but this is their expectation. And so you can kind of circle this back with mortgage rates, where mortgage rates are more or less 2%, give or take a few percentage points, above this target interest rate that the Federal Reserve sets. So I don't think we're likely to see much movement in mortgage rates over the next couple of years, and here's why. So these are the outlooks provided by the Federal Reserve over the next couple of years. So they're saying they think their target interest rate at the end of 2024 will be 5.1%, which is slightly below where we are right now. At the end of 2025, it'll be about 4%. So this means mortgage rates, barring anything unusual happening, will probably be around 7%, give or take some, for at least the next 2 years before we start to see some relief. So thinking about it from a real estate perspective, it's probably going to be quite some time before we might see mortgage rates around 3% again. I do think on the positive side, though, we are less likely to see a rate increase this year. So I think if I was betting the over or under on whether the Federal Reserve raises rates again, I would bet the under. This is just showing you inflation data for the Federal Reserve, and that black line is their target rate of 2%. And you can see in the middle of the chart there in 2021, 2022, we had rates of 6, 7, 8% a year. So this was the highest we'd seen since 1980. If you look at the last 6 months, the average is just above 2%. So in other words, we're seeing some very positive signs with inflation data. Assuming that these inflation figures continue, I think it means that the Federal Reserve is likely just going to pause the change in interest rates, and we'll see where things go. So I would bet the under on whether they raise rates this year. Okay, let me pivot now and talk about the real estate market in particular. So this is just showing you average sales and closed sales. So the closed sales are the solid line. The average sales, this is by month, is the dashed line. I'm using 2013 to 2019 as an average, and I think if you look at the New Orleans area real estate market, that's probably the most consistent time to set a benchmark. So I think it's really important when evaluating any type of economic data, whether it's real estate or financial data, that you have some sort of a benchmark to compare it to. I'll tell you why I'm not going to compare it to 2021 and 2022 in just a second. But you can see if we go back to early 2022, we had about 1,500 sales per month. We're now at just over 1,000 sales per month. So that's a pretty significant drop, although we're only about 14% below the historical norm from 2013 to 2016. And I want to talk about why that is and where it's happening. But this gives you a closer look of what we've been seeing. So this is over the last 9 months. Those red bars are the number of sales that we've had in the NOMAR region. The blue bars are the average for that month over a 6-year period. So you can see it really started in April to where we're starting to see more of a slowdown in the local real estate market, with sales being below the historical norm. And if you go to September, you can see we had 1,063 closed sales, and we'd averaged about 1,250 across the region per month. So the slowdown has really happened in the last 6 months. And this gives you a sense of where we're seeing the largest slowdowns by parish. So notice Washington Parish sales are actually up 7% over the last 6 months. So what this figure is showing you is sales over the last 6 months. The data are through September 30th, so they're very current, compared to the average number of sales in 2013 to 2019, that base year period that I'm looking at. So if you notice, Orleans Parish is down about 20%, Jefferson's down about 17%. Those two parishes constitute the largest share of sales in the NOMAR region, but there is a lot of variation across the region in terms of sales. You can see in St. James Parish, the number's minus 43%. One of the reasons you see large percentage changes in some areas is if you have a very few number of sales, you can have large jumps in the number. So one of the things that's true in St. James Parish is the sales represent about 1% of what happens in the region. So it's a relatively small share, and that's why we're seeing a pretty large increase there. But digging a little deeper into this, the reason why I think it's useful to talk about the 2013 to 2019 period as the benchmark is because really in 2021 and 2022, we saw what I would call a once-in-a-generation housing market. And I'm going to show you some numbers to support that. So that line is showing you the fraction of all residential sales that go under contract in 30 days or less. And you can see right now we're at 49.2%, so half of the sales are still going under contract in less than 30 days. You can see the historical norm going all the way out to 2013. This indicates January 2020, and you can see what happened is initially during COVID, the number of homes that were listed for sale really dropped. Buyers didn't stop purchasing, and it really put a significant strain on the market. And so you can see going into, say, January 2022, almost 80% of all residential sales were under contract in less than 30 days. Here's the comparison for homes under contract in less than 14 days. We're currently at 35.1%. And here's the real amazing statistic, is if you look at this solid black line, this is the fraction of all residential sales under contract in 5 days or less. So we're still at 21%, which is a very strong market. You look at across the board, going back to, say, 2013, that's still slightly above our historical norm. But you can see what happened in this area that I've shaded. So this is April 2021 to June 2022, and we averaged 40% or higher for the number of residential real estate sales going under contract in fewer than 5 days. In fact, in early 2022, I think at the peak, that number was 47%. So almost half of all residential properties were under contract in less than 5 days. So I understand market conditions today probably feel very, very different than what we saw just a year ago, but I think the useful benchmark to compare the current market to is not what happened last year, it's what happened between 2013 and 2019, which is much more normal for this particular market. But you can also see another indicator of just how strong the market was from a historical perspective from this chart. So this is showing you the fraction of residential sales that closed above the original list price. And again, you could see a large increase there starting in 2020. Notice in May of 2022, 36% of all residential properties in the region were selling for above the original list price. That's an amazing number when you go back and look at a historical perspective. You can see the pretty significant drop there, starting about the time that the Federal Reserve started raising interest rates and mortgage rates started to rise. But notice, we're still at about 12 to 13 to 14%. So even based on market conditions today, there's a significant number of homes that are selling for above the original list price, which is very consistent with what we were seeing before 2020. So again, I think the best indicator of where we are in the market is thinking about the pre-COVID days in 2019 and 2018. I also want to tie it in with prices. So the orange bar is showing you year-over-year change in list prices for all residential properties. And you can see earlier this year, beginning in March, year-over-year list prices became negative, but that has actually flipped in August and September. So in August and September of this year, year-over-year list prices were about 1% higher than they were in August and September of last year. So there hasn't been much movement in terms of list prices. We've seen a bit of a bigger adjustment on sales prices, which are the blue bars. So just to attach some numbers there, you can see starting in February, again, this is the entire NOMAR region. So year over year, sales prices were down about 1% compared to where they were in February of 2022. That number actually peaked or hit a bottom in May of this year, where prices were about 5% below where they were the previous May. But you can see what's happened in the last 4 months. Those negative numbers are getting smaller. So we're starting to see sales prices in September were only about 1% below where they were in last September. So I'm hopeful that the price reductions that we've seen across the board are likely going to be limited to certain pockets that I'll talk about in just a second. So we're also seeing a change in days on market, which is not surprising. So this is showing you the average days on market for the region. Again, I'm using 2013 to 2019 as the comparison. The average is that black dotted line. So about 50% of homes sell for less than 38 days, about 50% sell for more. You see we're now at 27, so we're still below the historical norm in terms of days on market. But you can see it's increased pretty significantly since early 2022 when mortgage rates started to rise. But there's also a lot of variation, as I'm sure you're aware, by price point as well. So this is just showing you average days on market and the actual days on market for September, the last month that we have data, at various price points. So if you look at the last 4 bars on the right, so homes selling between 400,000 and 500,000, and then homes selling for 500,000 or more, the days on market are pretty spot on with the historical average from 2013 to 2019. If you look at price points below 400,000, those homes are still moving at paces that are faster than the historical norm. So looking at, say, 200 to 250,000, you can see in September, the days on market was 21 days. So 50% of those homes were selling in fewer than 21 days. The average for that price bucket was 32 days. So I do think we're going to see days on market for homes below 400,000 increasing as well as the market continues to adjust. But the real change that we're seeing is in listings. So you saw earlier that there's been some adjustment on price. That's due to 2 different factors. One is we have fewer buyers. That's helping to suppress prices. The second piece is we actually have a pretty significant increase in listings, which also helps to suppress prices. So this is showing you active listings by month compared to the historical average. And you can see looking at, say, September, we have about 1,500 more homes listed in the market than we normally have. And really in the last 3 to 4 months, there's been a pretty significant increase in listings relative to our historical norm. And that's translating into higher months of supply. So this is an inventory compared to, again, the historical norm. Now I just want to be real clear on how these numbers are calculated. So you can see starting in January 2023, months of inventory start to increase pretty significantly. The latest number is 6. That means based on the number of homes that were available in September and dividing it by the average number of sales over the past 12 months. So that's how I'm calculating months of supply. And you can see it's quite a bit above the historical norm, but you also see the kind of ebb and flow pattern in the data, just indicating that there's a cyclical pattern to residential sales. But when you dig a little closer, the months of supply is really driven by just a couple areas. So again, this is current inventory relative to historical norms. You can see a lot of what we're seeing in the data is driven entirely by Orleans Parish. So right now, inventory levels are 100% higher than their average from 2013 to 2019. St. Bernard is also up quite a bit. Plaquemines is also up. It's up around the Nomar region, but what we're seeing is really more heavily concentrated in Orleans. And just to dig a little deeper into that, this is months of supply in Orleans Parish. So historically, it's about 4.3. Shot up very rapidly starting in January. We're now at 8.6. So I don't have a good sense of the local market enough to know why inventory levels are substantially higher than normal, but this is the one pocket where we're really seeing inventory levels above normal. And if you look a little closer, this is a zip code map for Orleans Parish. You can see it's kind of across the board, But if you look at zip code 70116 and 70130, so sort of the central business district, residential property listings there are almost 200% above their historical norm. So in those particular markets, those are a large number of residential properties, and that's really what's driving kind of the days on market and inventory that we're seeing at a regional level. It's just hyper concentrated in this one particular pocket in New Orleans. The last thing I want to talk about really quickly, and I'll say this before I go through this, please do not shoot the messenger. So I want to talk a little bit about FEMA risk rating and what it might mean for the real estate market. So these are FEMA claims data. This is the average claim going back. This is the 10 parish region. This is as far back as FEMA has the data. And so you can see 2005, this is by year of loss. So 2005 was Katrina, off the charts claims. Notice though, since 2010, we've had 3 different years where the average claim has exceeded $50,000. If you go back to 1985 and 1995, you see those little spikes. So in 2012, we had the same number of claims that we had in 1985, but the average value of those claims has risen substantially over the last, in particular, 10 years. So these are some of the data that FEMA has been using in their risk rating to make adjustments to flood insurance rates. So these data are actually from FEMA. So this is the average annual flood insurance premiums by parish in 2022. And again, there's a lot of variation if you look within particular parishes. So you can see areas where, in say, Plaquemines Parish, where flood insurance from FEMA is much lower than $842. You can see areas where it's significantly higher than $842. But for the parish that you're interested in, please keep these numbers in mind. I'll talk about Plaquemines and Orleans just because they've got some significant changes. You can see Orleans is about $795. Plaquemines is $842. Again, these are average in premiums by federal flood insurance through FEMA. If individuals have private flood insurance, I don't have access to that information. Now, the risk rating 2.0 is the adjustment that FEMA has made to flood insurance rates, where they say that it doesn't reflect the actual risk. So again, these numbers are from FEMA, they're not from me. This is what FEMA says the risk-adjusted insurance premium should be. So I know where the door is if I need to get away. And I double-checked these numbers because when I looked at this, I thought, well, these can't be right. So you look at Plaquemines Parish, they're saying it jumps, let's see if I can go back here. It jumps from 842 to 5,431. That's a 540% increase. You look at Orleans Parish, right? It goes from 795, I think it was 795, to 1583, about 100% increase. So again, there are certainly pockets in the region that won't see these kinds of increases, but if you take a broad average, the FEMA risk rating numbers suggest that flood insurance premiums should rise by about 120% across in most places. So I think it's a little bit early to tell what this is going to do to the real estate market, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on. But just to kind of summarize where we're at, I do think we might see sales volume slow a little bit more, particularly in the first half of 2024. I think, though, outside of some pockets in Orleans Parish, I think prices should stay relatively flat. And when I say relatively flat, I mean up 1%, down 1%. I wouldn't expect to see a lot of movements. The areas where we have a lot of oversupply right now are the areas that are most vulnerable to price decreases. I think the elephant in the room is really flood insurance. It's too early to know how potential buyers are responding. And here's really the issue, is the flood insurance can get capitalized into home prices. So what does that mean? If you take, say, a home in Metairie, and it's located in the best school district, and you could just pick up that house and move it to the worst school district, you all know that that home is going to sell for less. And so what happens is, if buyers perceive that these flood insurance risks are what's going to transpire, we're going to see rates increase at the level that FEMA suggests, this is likely going to reduce home prices in the areas that are going to see the greatest increase are going to see bigger reductions in home prices, but it's too early to know exactly how that's going to play out. With access to the MLS data, one of the things I'm going to dig into this year is whether or not buyers are adjusting their behavior based on those projected risk ratings. So with that, thank you very much.
All right. How's everybody doing this morning? I'll be brief. I know it's break time, but my name is Paul Domingue. I'm a mortgage lending officer with Home Bank. It's crazy. I gave a break speech last year at this time, and here I am again. So I really enjoy attending this event, the information that's presented each year, and Home Bank would like to thank everyone who put this together. Home Bank began in my hometown of Lafayette, and we have grown to not only serve communities throughout Louisiana, but Texas and Mississippi as well. This year, Home Bank is celebrating 115 years in business, and the slogan we chose to commemorate this milestone is, "We're still rocking it," and we really are, guys. Our industry is ever evolving, at times can fluctuate on a day-to-day basis, and with fluctuations come uncertainty and volatility. Our mortgage team at Home Bank is here to offer the best solutions during this time. We're a full-range mortgage carrier offering FHA, VA, RD, conventional, construction, and lot acquisition loans. We've recently revamped our CRA product, and we're now offering and calling it Home Access, offering low to moderate income borrowers 100% financing and an opportunity to become homeowners. Home Bank continually strives to offer competitive rates, exceptional customer service throughout the home buying process. So come by our table in the atrium. We'd love to meet you and discuss how we can offer a positive impact in our communities. So thank you so much and have a wonderful break.